Hello and welcome back to Mrs. Monroe and Bookwormy reading down the swale. Hello, everybody. It's a beautiful day outside. It sure is. We're out on the dock at Beach 6 in Lake Mohawk, New Jersey. That's right. And if you look behind us over there, you can see the drain pipe where our character Brogden had been sitting after he had fallen down the swale. It was hard for him to decide what his next course of action should be. While he knew that he certainly couldn't remain in the drain pipe, he wasn't sure where else to go. It was a short drop into the water, but he had never swum before. He also had to decide which direction to go once he was in the water, toward the beach or out toward the dock. The beach was farther than the dock, and he'd run the risk of being seen by the children. And after witnessing their relentless pursuit of the ducks, he wasn't eager to have that happen. The dock was closer, but the flashing silver propellers on the boats looked menacing. He didn't want to get too close to them either. The best thing would be to find something to float on, he thought, and then he could move quietly away. Unfortunately, the water below him was filled with only brown feathers, which he figured must have come from the ducks. His head turned from side to side as he tried to make up his mind. Beach. Dock. No, beach. Wait, absolutely not. Dock. Just as he was about to jump, hope for the best, and make up his mind once he was in the water, a blue plastic Frisbee flew through the air. It zipped right in front of the drain pipe and almost cut off his nose. It landed in the water directly below him and floated on the surface. There was writing on it, but since Brogden didn't know how to read, he had no idea what it said. Besides, the top of it was touching the water and facing away from him, so he would have had to read not only upside down, but backwards as well, which would have been difficult for anyone. Had he been able to read, he would have seen that it said, "For the best ice cream cones in the world, come to the milk barn," with a phone number underneath. "Grandma!" A little girl's voice rang out. "Rory lost the Frisbee. He threw it over there." Peeking out, Brogden saw a skinny, freckly girl wearing overalls that were rolled up to her knees. Her auburn hair hung down in two frizzy braids, and she was pointing her little finger in the direction of the Frisbee. A gray-haired woman rose from the lawn chair where she had been reading a paperback book. She was in blue jeans and a frayed camel-color sweater. There was a sun visor propped on her head. She joined the girl at the edge of the sand where it met the water. "See," the girl whined, still pointing. "It's the second one he's lost this week." Rory, the culprit, who was a near-perfect copy of the girl, minus the braids, joined them. "It's not my fault she can't catch," he grumbled. "It's not true," the girl spat back. "You can't throw." The three of them stood looking at the Frisbee. "I can get it, Grandma," Rory said. "I'll just climb up on that drain pipe and reach down." Upon hearing that, Brogden moved farther back into the drain pipe, afraid he would be discovered. He could, however, still hear what they were saying. "You can't reach it from there," his sister argued. "You're too short and you'll fall in. Besides, Grandma says the water's too deep over there. See, it's outside the ropes." "But I can swim," Rory cried emphatically. "I'm a good swimmer." He was clearly excited at the prospect of attempting this dangerous recovery mission. "No, that Frisbee will just have to stay put," Grandma stated firmly. She pointed at the sign on the beach. "See? No swimming on the beaches for another week until the lifeguards are on duty. Those are the rules of Lake Wahakmo." "Aw, rules schmools," Rory pouted. "I'm sorry, but that's the way it has to be," Grandma said. "Now, we better head back to the house. I've got a nice pot roast waiting for us, and you two can help set the table before Grandpa gets home." Her voice trailed off as they wandered up the beach. When Brogden felt sure they were gone, he poked his head out. The Frisbee was still floating there. He surveyed the beach. There were just two children left, but they were busy on a swing set, pulling their legs back and forth as they flew through the air. Brogden had now come to the conclusion that the Frisbee was his best option for rescuing himself. With his head tilted to one side, He pondered how to best get onto it. He eventually figured that his best course of action would be to sit on the bottom of the drain pipe and shove off with his hands. That way, he'd most likely land on his bum, not on his still aching ankle. So that's what he did, and quickly discovered that when someone is sitting in the upright position when they jumped, did not necessarily mean they remained upright when they landed. He hit the Frisbee on his side and had to scramble to right himself before the Frisbee, which he had realized was terribly tipsy, turned over. Once he was upright again, he discovered that this did not guarantee staying afloat either. So he tried various positions. If he stayed too close to the edge of the Frisbee, it began to tilt up behind him, and he had to move back toward the middle to steady it. He tried sitting on his knees and lying down on his stomach with his legs hanging off one side. He also tried lying flat on his back with his legs hanging off the other side. But that seemed awfully unproductive, although he did spot some interesting cloud formations from that position. He finally sat, with his bum square in the center and his legs sticking out in front of him. That proved to be most satisfyingly stable. And it was while he was seated this way that a marvelous thought occurred to him. For the first time in his life, he was captain of his own vessel, even if it was a plastic blue Frisbee. Although that he knew it was his first order of business to come up with a plan and get home to his aunts, who were probably out of their minds with worry, he couldn't help feeling a sense of, adventure. "The world is mine," he proclaimed triumphantly, and a fantasy of sailing across Lake Oaxaca settled in his mind, until he realized that, although he had something of a vessel, he did not have a sail, an engine, or a propeller. Suddenly the propellers on the boats didn't look so menacing. Actually, they looked quite useful. And then he recalled his shoe slung over his shoulder. Perhaps it could be a kind of oar. He wound the laces around and around the shoe and tied them together so that no part of them hung down, and then he began paddling to his right. And after several strokes, he found that his hard work only resulted in the Frisbee spinning around in a circle, and it made him a bit dizzy. He waited until the spinning stopped and tried a new tactic. He paddled one stroke to the right, and then went to the left, right, left, as quickly as he could. After several minutes, he was red in the face, out of breath, even more dizzy, and virtually in the same spot where he'd started. Discouraged, he pulled the shoe oar out of the water. He realized now that without a current to push him forward, he was going nowhere. And at the moment, there wasn't any current to be found. He looked at the propellers on the boats. "That's what I need. Some kind of a propeller. Maybe his feet would work. It wouldn't be that hard. If he stayed in his seated position and kicked, he'd move in reverse, which was not altogether a bad thing. At least he'd be moving somewhere. But what about the pain in your ankle, his brain reminded him, and he was forced to admit that a set of foot propellers was very much out of the question. Holding his shoe on his lap, he sat and sighed over his terrible state of affairs. If only he could make it to the dock, he thought. He could hide in one of the boats for a day or so while his ankle healed. Then he'd head to the beach, hike to where the drain pipe met the swale, and follow the swale home. The boat dock was probably only 20 feet away, but to Brogden, who was only a foot tall, it felt like 20 miles. He would have remained there, bobbing up and down like a cork, for who knows how long, had not two ducks skimmed into the water beside him. They created an impressive splash, drenching him all over and almost causing his Frisbee to overturn. He was beginning to wonder if he'd ever be dry again. What did you think, Bookwormy? What did you think of Bookwormy maybe having a vessel like Brogden someday? "Oh, I think I'd like that. I think I would like to sit on a Frisbee and sort of float around in the water, and I'd be a captain of my own vessel, too." That sounds very exciting, Bookwormy. Well, we'll find out what happens when Brogden meets these ducks. Let's see if he talks to them later on in the story. Hope you enjoyed this part today, and keep on sticking with us for Down the Swale.